Guys, we are jumping into the next unit, which is metabolism. So this unit includes a chapter on enzymes, a chapter on cellular respiration, and then last, a chapter on photosynthesis. So we will do the enzymes before we break into Thanksgiving, and then when we come back between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we will wrap up photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So we seem to be moving along quite well in our curriculum. I was a little bit concerned because we got a little bit of a late start, but y'all have done great just trying to keep with the pace while we're virtual. So let's go ahead and dive in. So metabolism, we talked about this a little bit before in the very first unit when we kind of introed some of these topics. So metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions in the body. So we have reactions that break down, like those reactions that convert ATP to ADP. We saw their importance in the last unit with phosphorylation and activating protein kinases and other molecules. And so those breakdown reactions are catabolic reactions, catabolism, and energy is released, such as in the ATP example. Okay, anabolism is the opposite, or anabolic reactions are reactions that build up. So if you take an ADP and you add that extra phosphate onto it, that requires energy, and then that's an anabolic reaction. Okay, so bioenergetics is the study of energy flow in the system. So this whole unit is somewhat about bioenergetics, how energy moves through organisms through the processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So energy can have lots of different forms. Kinetic energy, we talked about that a little bit last year in biochemistry if you had me. Heat or thermal energy, light energy, potential energy, and chemical energy. Chemical energy is the energy that's held in bonds. Potential energy is stored energy. So you see that up here in the diver that's on the platform. Because he's from a higher spot, he has stored energy. As he actually moves into diving, that's the energy of motion, which is kinetic energy. So you see that energy changes from potential to kinetic. And then heat and thermal energy. Light energy comes from the sun. Our body transfers energy from our food into heat or thermal energy, and that's why we maintain that, a body temperature. That's why we produce heat or release heat when we exercise and we burn more energy, because our body is converting energy. So metabolism is all about these energy transfers that happen within living organisms. And so kind of the study of that also is the bioenergetics is a study of energy flow, but thermodynamics is energy transfer, that transfer from chemical to kinetic or whatever of those energy types. So energy is exchanged between a system and a surroundings. So the system in this example would be like the bear. Okay, the bear would be the system, and it's going to release energy to the surroundings. Now, some systems are open systems, and some are closed systems or isolated systems. And so in a closed system, energy is never released to the surroundings. In an open system, energy can be released to the surroundings. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy can't be created or destroyed, only transferred and transformed between these forms that we talked about here. Okay. The second law of thermodynamics talks about how some processes are spontaneous versus non-spontaneous, and that energy transfer increases entropy. And so what entropy is the disorder of a system. Okay, and all energy transfers are going to increase disorder in a system. So spontaneous reactions are energetically favorable. They have a positive change in entropy, so that means they're going to increase disorder, versus non-spontaneous reactions are energetically unfavorable. They have a negative change in entropy or a decrease in entropy. So for example, we have in this fish that this bear is eating energy that's stored, and it's bound up in that fish. That's a very energy stable form in that fish. And so when the bear eats the fish, it gets the energy that's bound up in the fish, the chemical energy, and it releases it to heat, releases it as carbon dioxide and water. And so that is a spontaneous change of reaction. This energy that was in this finite little package of a fish here has now been released to the environment. And so we see that the energy went to the surroundings, right, from the system. The system was the fish here, the system was the bear, and it was released to the surroundings. That was spontaneous. It was energetically favorable because it increased the entropy of the surroundings, okay? Or of the universe, as this definition says. Universe would be the same as the surroundings, okay? Now, these concepts are a little bit more chemistry. If you took a college chemistry course, you would see a lot more about thermodynamics and entropy and all of those types of things. But I just wanted to briefly touch on them before we jump into really the meat of our lesson today, which is ATP. So we've talked about ATP before. This should not be a new concept, but ATP is used to do cellular work. So we can have work that comes in different forms. We can have chemical work, transport work, and mechanical work, okay? So chemical work is, breaking down energy and actually using it, putting it into a different, transferring it to a different chemical, doing it in a different chemical reaction, okay? Transport is like what we see here with our transport proteins. We've talked about in active transport that cells require ATP, and so that is one type of work that can be done. And then mechanical transport is actually like physical movement. And we saw that with the motor proteins moving down the cytoskeleton or the microtubules to be able to pull chromosomes apart, to be able to move transport vesicles that contain proteins as they're being built in the cell. So hopefully you're kind of starting to put some of these ideas together in biology. So sometimes in a cell, we use what's called energy coupling. Energy coupling is a process when you use an exergonic process. So that's an energy releasing process. These terms are important. Exergonic and endergonic are important. To drive a process that requires energy, an endergonic process. And that's referred to as energy coupling. And we see that a lot in the cell, okay? And I'll point those out specifically in photosynthesis and cellular respiration when we get into that, okay? That an exergonic process drives an endergonic process. And so usually in these energy coupling examples, we have what's called a phosphorylated intermediate, okay? And when ATP is broken down into ADP, we release that one phosphate group, right? And what we saw in cellular communication is that phosphate group often gets added onto something else, okay? And it causes it to do something, okay? Be activated in a signaling pathway, etc. But that molecule that gets that phosphate added on is referred to as the phosphorylated intermediate, okay? It's kind of a second step in the reaction. In cellular communication, we usually saw it in the transduction phase, right? Not in the signal, but in the transduction before we got to the response. But whatever that got that phosphate added onto it is referred to as the phosphorylated intermediate, okay? So here we have an example. We have glutamic acid, okay, plus ATP. That ATP gets broken down into phosphate plus ADP. And so what our phosphorylated intermediate is this glutamic acid, okay? And then once you bring in this ammonia, then you can, you get your chemical reaction and your product over here. All right. And so this example also shows energy coupling. So we take a reaction that produces energy, and we use it to drive a reaction that needs energy. All right. And so you see the energy coupling. We have a positive energy reaction. We have a negative energy reaction. And so it gives us our net metabolic reaction that you see here. So this is just another picture of how ATP can be used to do cellular work. As I mentioned previously, the transport work and the mechanical work. Okay. So one thing that's important is ATP is usually regenerated. And so we can add, just as we can pop that that phosphate off of the ATP, we can also add it back on. And that happens a lot within the cell. Okay. We have to constantly take glucose in to make ATP. But what we're making that ATP from is not from scratch. We're making it from ADPs and phosphates, okay? And so we're taking we have to break down ATP, use energy to actually build stuff. So it's an energy coupling reaction, okay? Because we have to use ATP to actually be able to synthesize more ATP. And so it's a cycle. If you read here in the statement, the body regenerates 10 million molecules of ATP per second. Okay, we use a lot of ATP. But we have catabolic reactions, the exergonic reactions that release ATP, paired with the endergonic reactions that require ATP, and those cycle themselves. Okay. So I'm going to stop with that for today. You have a worksheet on ATP that you will complete. I'm working on grading your all's tests today, so hopefully I'll get those back to you very soon. And let me know if you have any questions. Y'all have a great day.